Hey everybody, Braden here. Welcome back to another tournament game analysis video. We are going to be covering game number 3 in the Howard Rideau Memorial. I am playing with the white pieces against, it's hard to pronounce the name, Kushitic? I think? My apologies for my opponent. So, in this game, I found out after that my opponent was not rated what it originally said that I wrote on my sheet. So let me just find the sheet for this game right here because I have it. I originally thought before the game their rating was 2270. This played a huge psychological role on the game. They played like that too, by the way. Their Lichess, I think they talked to me after, it was like 2400 in their rapid. They're very strong, which is about what my rapid rating is online as well for Lichess. Okay, let's get into the game. So I play e4. We see d6, d4, g6, and okay, we're getting a perk again. But this time my opponent played g6 instead of knight f6. And this allowed me to play into a King's Indian where I don't have to make concessions as I originally did with, if we go here with knight f6, if I play bishop d3 instead. Now I don't play that anyways, and after this game I did some research into it because my idea was these events, this event that you're seeing right now was a weekly club event. So every time I'd go, I would just spend the following week on that opening just to make sure like I understand it better than I did the week before or before the game. And I was kind of doing the survivor's bias of training, which I thought, which actually is a good way in my opinion to train. Yeah, so after knight f6, instead, now I'm going to be playing f3. So this just lets me go into a same-ish King's Indian where I don't make concessions with bishop d3 because the bishop doesn't belong on d3. Let's get into it. So g6, knight c4, knight f6, knight c3, bishop g7. I end up going for the classical King's Indian here with knight f3. Castles, bishop e2, knight bd7. And I was thinking, oh great, I'm not really prepared for these knight bd7 lines, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. Here we see castles, and then c6, which was surprising. Actually, as far as I'm concerned, I'm pretty sure theoretically now e5 is a bit stronger, where bishop e3, you play this move queen e7, which looks really funny. You could also take on d4, but if you're trying to get a King's Indian, a lot of people used to play c6, but now queen e7 is a little bit better. And the idea is if the move d5 is forced, then you play c5 in this position, and you're keeping a tempo over the game continuation where c6, queen c2, e5 is if you play d5 here and you play a move like queen e7, then you play c5 afterwards because white's unlikely to take, and you want to push instead of taking on d5. So that's the idea, is it just like saves the tempo. Instead of c6 and then c5, it's just c5 in one move. So a little bit of food for thought there in case you're a King's Indian player. But okay, d takes e5. Yeah, so since I committed my queen to c2 already, I thought this structure actually made sense since the c-files will stay closed. I was also considering d5 because I was hoping for a position like this, where it's like an Alpin Sicilian again, but it feels like the queen's misplaced. Objectively, this is actually a really good position for us, and I should have gone into it. But I thought taking on e5 was a little interesting as well. I was very familiar with these from the black side, and I believe in these positions more from the black side, but I knew some plans that were really annoying for white to deal with. And one plan in particular, so actually, before we even get into that, let's just talk about the position. We can talk about it from the white side or black side. I'm going to talk about it from the white side, and even as the black side, I'm going to keep the position the same, because then the overlay will make sense still. And I'm lazy. But here, in this position, white has an idea, for example, of playing b4, c5, knight d2, c4, and d6. This is the weakness in black's position, the d6 square. And for black, what they want to do is they just want to neutralize everything and then let the imbalance of the center take course. So if white doesn't find this plan, which is an easy plan to miss, when we look at the position, there's only one imbalance. First, actually, there's two. One, they have a fianchetto, we don't. But eventually they play like f6 and then bishop f8. So that's something important to mention, is that the fianchetto in the long term in like endings won't matter because they bring their bishop to like c5 anyways. Another thing, again, the big imbalance is the center. They have a pawn on c6, we have a pawn on c4. We have a weak d4 square, whereas they have a strong d5 square. So they can try to exploit it by bringing, for example, a knight to d4 via c5. They can also keep a knight on c5 by playing a5. And their goal is eventually straight up just to take advantage of one square. And a lot of the times it works. So we have to be very aware of this idea of b4, c5, knight d2, c4, as this is the only thing that's really challenged me when I was a King's Indian player. So I play h3 to start. And I was expecting knight h5, but my opponent played queen c7. And now I go bishop b3. I didn't go for b4 immediately. I decided bishop b3 first, just to cover it. And also, if I play b4 and a5, I don't have to worry either. Here, a5 makes a little bit less sense because a3, b4 is a little bit more forceful because of it. Like, let's just say a5. Actually, my apologies. Scrap that. c5 is even better now. And the problem is they never want to play b6 because now it just weakens the side of the board for them. This is a huge problem. Actually, white's winning here, which is crazy. So, okay, b6 was played. And this is potentially to follow up with a5, actually. I played b4 because now my idea is coming into place. They could play a5, and they probably should at this point. a5 and then a3. And if they take, then everything on the a file swaps, but then I get the a file, which is nice. Instead here, queen d6 was played, and this was surprising. This is actually a mistake. So I thought c5 was fine. Objectively, it is, actually, by the way. And we're going to get into the complications of it. But I could have also just played either a3 or, funnily enough, rook f or rook a to b1. And the idea is just to hold the pawn for the moment. Eventually, we'll play rook d1. And we will just continue our potential idea of playing c5 and trying to break down the queenside structure. So one other thing that we should mention is playing c5 for the intention of d6 isn't the only idea. If we can create some sort of weakness on the queenside, we're more dealt with dealing with it, or we're more capable of dealing with it because of the space imbalance. So although there's a pawn here, and they control d4 and we don't really control d5 as well because they have a pawn on c6, it also means we have more space. And generally on the side we have more space, we want to attack. So that's why I'm playing mainly in the center and on the queen side. Okay, so I play c5. And there's a lot of stuff we have to calculate. So originally b takes c5, rook fd1 was my idea, queen e7, and I was actually just intending to play take back. And if knight takes e5, I saw that at least knight d5 looked interesting, though it's not really as great. So what I calculated here was takes, queen c7, e takes d5. We can't take the rook because of the pin. But I actually missed this move bishop f5. Actually, maybe that's not true. I don't think I missed bishop f5, but after a move like queen c1 or even queen c3, I was worried here of, I think, yeah, queen c4. I thought that maybe this is probably just equal after, like, actually this rook is probably wrong. This rook looks better. Something like this would happen. And things just get traded, essentially, in this. Our opponent has a little bit of initiative, which is annoying to deal with. But after b takes c5, funnily enough, what we should do instead is actually play b5 or a3. I personally like b5 more, but a3 is stronger. And the idea here, again, is just to give up the pawns in a way where we just get a crazy initiative on the queen side. If everything comes off, this is just a King's Indian where, well, the queen side is already decided and we have a lot more space still, despite there being like no pawns for us to have a so-called space. So queen e7, bishop takes a7 is recommended. Queen d8. This is actually just better for white here. Bishop e3, and we can kind of start to see what I mean by an initiative on the queen side. Is eventually this pawn is extremely weak. It's just gonna fall, and when it does, what's that bishop doing on g7? Not really much, and our activity is gonna start showing. So queen e7 was played immediately, which I was happy about, because then I had the chance to play knight a4. I didn't have to play knight a4. I could have also brought rooks to the c file and offer the same thing, but I didn't see that idea at all, because that's hard to see. So they played b5, and I was going to play knight b2. I don't know why I didn't. This was my intention. I was going to play knight c3, and then knight b2, and the idea is I can go to b3, or d3, my apologies. The one thing I was worried about, also, this also helps with a4, if I want to make that break. I was worried of e4 potentially hanging. So I ended up just going back, and I think this is a mistake, because now it allows a5. My opponent did not play the move. They actually played a6, which feels extremely weak. But a5 could have been a little bit more promising for them. Objectively, if they have to make a move like bishop b7, we can still clearly see that white should have an advantage still, because bishop b7 is a sad move to make. Of course, the idea is to connect the rooks, but the bishop on b7 is doing absolutely nothing anytime soon. Okay, so my opponent played a6 instead, and now it felt like, okay, the game's back on. So I could play a4, or I could play what I played, which is knight d2. I thought both were fine. The idea of knight d2 is I'm going to go to a5 potentially and just target c6. We see rook d8, knight b3, and again, I wanted to reroute my knight to a5 since they had a weakness on c6. And a4 is still in the cards, which is great. We see knight f8, going for e6 and then d4. Rook fd1, just trying to neutralize this file. Bishop d7, and now I thought it was time for a4. Actually, there's a really funny move here. Rook d6. And if knight e8, we go rook d3. And we just claim that this is actually just like better. That we just like force them to waste the move, because we get onto the d file a bit faster. And like the first thing we have to ask is like, what if they just play like bishop e8 or bishop e6? Turns out we actually just go back to d6. And if they take, we can take with the pawn, bishop c5, knight c5 comes, and this is winning. Very funny that like we can take advantage of the d file like that. I didn't see that. Obviously, I went for a4. Now we see knight e6, going for d4. Took on b5, took on b5, took on a8, took on a8, and then played knight a5. So I gave up the a file, but just played knight a5 and said, okay, you don't actually have the a file. And because I close it down. And unfortunately, no knight takes c5 sacrifices work, because bishop takes c5 with tempo against the queen. So they don't have time for like rook takes a5 or anything. My opponent played bishop e8. I played bishop to f1 here, with the idea of potentially fianchettoing it. I thought this was a really funny idea, but let's see how it works out. Bishop f8. I go knight e2 first, just to make sure d4 is extra not possible. Also, it covers c5 more, so if any sacrifices on c5, I can, you know, reinforce it a little bit. Queen c7 was played. And they're not really still threatening to sacrifice on c5, because if takes, I can take it, takes, and then queen takes. So I just go g3, and again, this is what I mean by fianchettoing my bishop and rerouting it, is that I'm just going to be playing it like it's a King's Indian defense from our side as well. Like a King's Indian attack, King's Indian defense, where I'm going to go for f4. And what's the weakness in the position? There's a few weaknesses. There's d6 is slightly weak, but not right now. They have a lot of coverage on it. But c6 is noticeably very weak. And bishop g2 is doing a few things. It's preparing f4, where we go for a kingside attack, where that's the only side we can really make progress at this point. But also, more importantly, if they ever take and we play e5, c6 is weak. So the idea of bishop f1 to g2 is actually really just to target c6. Knight d7 was played. Now I have to worry about sacrifices, so I play knight b3. We see rook a4. I just go queen c3, defend everything. Knight f6 back, which felt little strange because it doesn't really make sense that they just, you know, go back here. They can argue that, well, they successfully got their rook into my position instead, but it felt like maybe something like f5 or bishop g7 was calling out to be played. But okay, knight f6. I played bishop g2, and again I have my ideas of f4. Rook a8, and now I played another move I am very happy with. I gotta give this one an exclam. I'm sorry, I gotta do it. But the idea, bishop c1. There's a few moves that are of equal strength here, but I'm very happy about bishop c1. I explained in my notes that I'm trying to avoid f4, e takes f4, hitting my bishop because now f6 is hanging. And before e3 was hanging as well, if e takes f4. So if I play f4 immediately, the problem is I can't really take on f6. I have to take back on f4. And this is still fine. They shouldn't really take on f4 anyways, but also, again, rerouting to b2 to target e5 and also potentially make f4 stronger. I was really happy with that idea. So bishop g7, bishop to b2, rook to d8, and I want to keep my pieces on, so I play rook f1. My opponent was pretty low on time, as you can see by the timers at the top, and then at the bottom is of course mine. And I think that's why they play knight d4. But knight d4, yeah, it's a desperation move, trying to go for activity. So I take it. And I don't even fully allow activity. I play queen d3. And the idea here is I'm trying to take it under the best possible circumstances, where I want to take on d4 when there's none, like no activity to even speak of. So knight d7 was played with potential knight e5, and that's why I played queen d3 as well, is because I saw f4. Now knight b8, and we can see again their pieces aren't really doing much. And now I decide to take. It felt like I can get away with it now, and you know I can play like queen c3 next, and everything's fine and dandy because they just brought their knight from f6 to b8. It's not really doing much. Queen a7 was played. I played queen c3 again just to avoid any problems. They played bishop f8. So I played bishop f6, and this almost forces bishop b7. Like if they have to play with something like rook c8, then I can play rook a1 and just keep getting activity. And this looked really promising. So bishop e7. Now I play rook a1, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and queen d7. And I saw a funny move here, rook a8, which is annoying, because they can't move their knight, d8's hanging, and they can't really enter, because they have to worry about moves like queen d6 coming as well. Because queen d6 tries to threaten a trade, and any trades here are just kind of the end of the game. Rook c8 was played to get out of any queen takes d8 problems. Because now after knight d4, they have queen b7. But that's okay, because now I just got them off of the open file. Queen b7, rook a1, knight a6, and I decide to eventually hang the pawn. I don't really see a choice here. So rook b1, queen d7. I immediately realize like their king is extremely weak. The way to win this game now is to just open up the king side with h4. So that's what I do. Rook d8, so they get the file back, but they had to waste a lot of time to do it. Knight f3. I'm pretty sad I missed knight takes e6. Very easy to miss though, let's be fair. Just because if they take, then I can take on d8. But I was pretty low on time as well. I played knight f3 instead. Queen d3, attacking my rook, and so this is where I decided to just start sacrificing things on the queen side, because the king side attack is just, it's coming through. Rook e1, knight takes b4, h5 now, and h6 is a huge threat. They have to avoid it. They kind of are forced to take. Queen g5 check, king f8, queen h6 check. King e7 was played, which is actually surprising. I was expecting a repetition here. And there was like a 50-50 chance I might have even just like went for the repetition. Because this is like, you know, they just took a pawn. This could be a little scary. There is a way to win though. In this position, we just play f5 and then we go for f6. this is actually a good way to win the position. And h6 is being recommended, but of course we take that, and we still have like f6 coming. So that should win. But no, they played king e7. I played queen g5 check. And then they played f6 instead of going king f8. And this made my job a lot easier, because after f6, we now have queen g7. And queen g7, bishop f7. There's a really key move here. There's a few moves that win. I'll tell you the other two, rook a1 and knight h4. But there's one move that is undoubtedly better than the rest. So I'll give a little bit of time to try to find it. White to move. Any other move other than these three, by the way, are actually just draw. They're just a draw. So, like queen takes h7 looks kind of, honestly, it looks very natural. It's a draw. So hopefully you found the move. The move here is e5. And after e5, unfortunately, there's no way to stop either taking or e6. My opponent played f5, but after e6, my opponent ended up resigning here. There's no way to avoid everything falling. Rook f8. To defend the bishop, I still take with check, and then win the rook. For example, rook f8 takes, they have to move anyways, and then we take the rook as well. There's just too many ways to win after the move e6, so that's why my opponent ended up resigning. Turns out they didn't have a rating before this game, which is unfortunate because, well, if they were like a 2300, then, you know, that would have been good for our rating, but they actually didn't. So they ended up, after this tournament, getting a 1547 rating here. And so it turned out I played a 1550 instead, who again was like 2400 on Lichess. Why does this keep happening to me, where I play strong opponents that have like no rating? That's the new age of chess for everybody, is you play extremely strong opponents that only play online, but they're very, very strong. Anyways, I hope you guys did enjoy this one. I thought it was a really fun one to play. Definitely some mistakes in there, but also some interesting things to think about as well, and also eventually led me to realizing what I should make my opening repertoire against the Perk, which made me happy. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all in the final round of the Howard Rideau Memorial. Bye-bye.